My name is Nora Whitfield, and I'm 32 years old. What happened to me wasn't just strange, it was horrifying. And it didn't start when I moved into my grandmother's old house in Vermont. It started long before I was even born. This is the story of how I uncovered a truth buried in silence for generations. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this channel if you love real-life inspired stories full of mystery, emotion, and unexpected twists. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I moved into my grandmother's house in early autumn, right as the leaves in northern Vermont began to curl into fire-colored edges and fall like brittle confessions across the driveway. I had just left New York City after a messy divorce and a job loss that had left me with more questions than answers. The house had stood untouched since my grandmother's death 6 months earlier. No one had claimed it. My father had died in a construction accident when I was a baby, and my mother vanished when I was only 7. I was raised by foster families, shuffled from home to home, until I aged out of the system and made a life of my own. But now, jobless and emotionally drained, I had nowhere else to go. So when I received a letter from a Vermont law firm addressed to Nora Whitfield, Solaire, I felt something between confusion and destiny. I expected dust, old photographs, and silence. I wasn't prepared for what I found. The house was exactly as it had been left. Pictures still hung, a pot still sitting on the stove, as if my grandmother had stepped out and never returned. But something was wrong. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Not fear, not cold. It was silence. A deep, unnatural silence that pressed against my eardrums like thick velvet. No creaks, no ticking clock, not even the sound of my own footsteps on the wooden floors. I spoke aloud, "Hello," and my voice felt swallowed, muted. It was as if the walls absorbed sound rather than reflected it. That night, I couldn't sleep. This silence felt alive. At 3:17 a.m., I woke suddenly. I hadn't heard anything because, again, there was no sound, but I felt something. I sat up and saw a shadow standing by the bedroom door, tall, still, watching. I turned on the lamp, and it vanished. The next morning, I explored the attic and found a locked trunk with my name carved into the lid, not painted or written, but carved into the wood like someone had taken hours doing it. Inside was a faded journal, dozens of yellowed letters, and a birth certificate. Not mine. It belonged to someone named Eliza Whitfield, born in 1891, died, no date. But the strangest thing, she looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same hairline, same scar above the eyebrow. And then the real terror began, not with ghosts or nightmares, but with memories that weren't mine. I started dreaming in sepia tones. I saw a woman running through the woods barefoot, blood on her hands, crying. I saw a baby being hidden in the walls of the house. I heard lullabies in a language I had never learned. And when I woke, I knew things I had no way of knowing, like where the key was hidden beneath the fireplace bricks, or that my grandmother's middle name wasn't Margaret, like the record said, but Magdalena. Every day in that house felt like walking deeper into someone else's life. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized I wasn't just living in my grandmother's home. I was stepping into a history that was clawing its way into the present, and it was waiting for me to remember everything. It began the next morning with a whisper that didn't belong to me. I was standing in the hallway outside the attic, staring at the trunk with the name Eliza Whitfield carved into the lid again, wondering why my own face stared back at me from a 19th century photo. As I reached down to touch the yellowed papers, I heard it just behind my right ear, soft and cold like fog. "You left me there." I turned so fast I nearly fell. Heart pounding, but there was no one behind me. And yet, that voice didn't come from a memory, a dream, or my imagination. It had come from the house, from inside it. That same day, I found myself instinctively walking to the edge of the woods behind the house, guided by a strange pull I couldn't explain, like my feet remembered a path I'd never walked. I pushed through branches until I reached a clearing with a half-buried stone well covered in moss and tangled vines. Something inside me froze. I knew this place. I didn't just know it, I had been here. I could feel my heart beat slow as though I were sensing with an old rhythm that lived in the dirt. And then the sound came again, not a voice this time, but the sound of a lullaby, humming, a woman's voice, faint, but real. I backed away and ran. But when I got home, I found the front door wide open. Even though I had locked it before leaving, the house smelled different, like soil and lavender, and someone had moved the trunk from the attic to the living room. I hadn't touched it in days. My hand shook as I opened it again. The journal was open now, not where I left it, but flipped to a page marked October 11, 1897, exactly 100 years before I was born. The entry read, "The child knows. She remembers too soon. I thought we had buried the bloodline, but it clings to her bones." I slammed the journal shut, heart racing. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the walls. I listened for footsteps that never made sound. I sat in bed with the lights on and cried. Not out of fear, but recognition. These weren't just ghosts. This wasn't just some haunted house. This was my family, my blood, my past clawing back through time. And as I drifted into an easy sleep, I saw her again in my dreams, the woman who looked like me wearing a blood-soaked dress, whispering through tears, "You have to finish what I couldn't." When I woke up, the words "dig beneath the cradle" were scratched into the floorboards beside my bed. And I had never owned a cradle. I didn't wait for the sun to rise. I couldn't. As soon as the faint blue of dawn cracked through the edges of the windows, I was already in the attic, searching for the cradle, one I had never seen before, one that had no reason to exist in this house. But it was there, at the far end of the attic, hidden under a thick sheet, coated in time and memory, sat an old wooden cradle, carved with delicate flowers and symbols I couldn't recognize, but felt oddly familiar. I didn't hesitate. I pushed it aside and dropped to my knees, fingers scraping against the gold wooden floor until I found what I didn't know I was looking for, a loose board. My heart hammered in my chest as I pried it up, revealing a hidden space no bigger than a suitcase. Inside was a small wooden box, sealed shut with rusted metal clasps. I opened it slowly, half expecting bones or relics of death. But what I found were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to Eliza Whitfield, from someone signed only as H. The letters spoke in cryptic, poetic warnings. They'll never let us leave. The silence is their gift, and their curse. You must protect the child. She is the last key. My hands trembled as I read them. Some were singed at the edges. Others had red smears I didn't want to believe were blood. But the last one, dated June 21st, 1899, changed everything. It read, "They buried her voice, but not her will. She will return in flesh and familiar, and the house will call her home." I dropped the letter. My breath caught. That night, I stood in front of the mirror for hours, tracing my face, my lips, my eyes. Who was I? I had lived my whole life thinking I was just a woman with bad luck and a broken family. But now it felt like I had been placed to turn like a key to a lock that had waited a century to be opened. That evening, the whispering came back, stronger now, no longer behind me but beside me. It spoke as if it had been waiting years to be heard. Go to the church. The truth is beneath the ashes. I didn't know what church. I had no memories of any church. But the moment the voice spoke, I knew exactly where to go. I got in the car and drove 7 miles north on an unpaved road I had never seen on any map, and there, buried in the trees, was the charred remains of a church. The bell tower had collapsed. The pews were blackened skeletons of wood, and in the center, surrounded by fire-kissed stones, was a trapdoor. I opened it with shaking hands. A narrow staircase led underground to a room that smelled of mold and memory. On the wall were dozens of photographs, black and white, faded of me, not Eliza, me, in modern clothing, in places I had never been. And then I heard it again, her voice, My voice, one and the same, you came back, but they know now, and they're watching. Behind me, I heard a breath that wasn't mine, and I knew I was no longer alone. I didn't move. I couldn't. Behind me, the air had shifted heavier, colder, and the breath I heard wasn't imagined. It was real, steady, raspy, like someone had been hiding in the shadows for far too long. I turned slowly. Hard thundering in my chest, and there just beyond the stairs stood a man, not a ghost, a man, elderly, pale as candle wax, with eyes like smoke and skin so thin it looked almost transparent. He said nothing at first, just stared at me like I was something ancient, something sacred, or something cursed. You shouldn't be here yet, he finally said, his voice brittle like cracking leaves. You came back too soon. The line was supposed to break. I asked who he was, demanded to know what all of this meant, but he only smiled faintly and pointed toward the wall, toward the photographs of me, saying, "You were never supposed to see this. But it began with you, and it must end with you." I took a step back, my body trembling, unsure if I should run or scream or cry. "I'm Nora," I whispered, though even as I said it, I questioned whether that name truly belonged to me anymore. "No," he said, walking closer. "You're what's left of Eliza, what she couldn't finish, which she couldn't forgive." And then he handed me something I hadn't noticed before, an old key wrapped in linen and twine. He told me it opened a door in the house, one that didn't exist in the blueprints or the records. It was sealed before the fire, he said. The echoes live behind it. Before I could ask anything else, he turned and disappeared through a narrow passage behind the altar, swallowed by shadow as though he'd never been there at all. I left the church, key clutched in my fist, and drove back in silence, the trees blurring past like ghosts watching from the edge of memory. When I returned home, it was almost midnight, and the house felt wrong, not just haunted aware. I walked the halls slowly, the key weighing heavier with each step. That's when I noticed something strange in the back of the basementer. Smooth panel behind the furnace, and like the rest of the brick wall, I pressed the key into a near invisible hole in the corner. With a groan, the wall creaked open to reveal a stone stairwell leading downward into the dark. A door waited at the end, massive, rotting wood, carved with symbols matching the ones on the cradle. I opened it slowly, and what I saw made my legs go weak. The room beyond wasn't a room, it was a chamber, circular and wide, lined with mirrors and empty chairs facing a pedestal in the center. On that pedestal lay a child's dress, soaked in something dark and dried, surrounded by wilted white flowers. Whispers filled the air, not loud, but overlapping like hundreds of voices speaking in desperate harmony. And I knew then, without being told, that I had been here before, not in this life, but long ago. I sank to my knees, clutching my head, as memories surged, images not my own flooding in, screams, fire, hands pulling me away, a promise sworn in blood. The silence protects them, the whisper said, but you broke it. I stumbled out, heart racing, skin crawling, and the moment I reached the basement door, it slammed shut behind me, and I realized, with terrifying clarity, that the house wasn't just remembering me, it was waking up. The house groaned like a creature stirred from slumber, every wall pulsing with a heartbeat I could feel in my bones. And I knew something ancient had been broken, some pact or protection that kept the horrors of the past tucked safely away. In silence, I stood frozen at the top of the basement stairs, staring back at the sealed chamber below, knowing I had awoken a part of my own history I couldn't bury again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My reflection in the whole mirror looked pale, hollowed out, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize my own eyes. That night, the dreams didn't wait for sleep to begin. They bled into my waking world. I saw flashes of Liz's hands covered in mud, digging through cold earth. A circle of cloaked figures chanting beneath the church. A child taken, hidden, in the cradle, not to sleep but to silence her gift. The next morning, I awoke with dirt under my fingernails. I hadn't left the house, at least, not willingly. The old man's voice echoed in my mind. The echoes live behind it. What did that mean? Were the voices I heard truly spirits? Or were they me, fragments of a soul that had fractured and spread across time like broken glass, desperate for answers? I returned to the journal from the trunk, flipping toward the end, where the writing became frantic and splattered with ink, and what I feared was blood. One line stood out. Only the bloodline can silence the curse, but she must choose to bury it again, or bring it fully into light. That same day, I found a letter addressed not to Eliza but to me. Nora, if you're reading this, the house has chosen you again. Your mother tried to end it, to erase it from your blood. That's why she disappeared. She didn't run, she was taken. And if you keep going, they'll come for you too. My mother, she had been part of this. My breath caught. I had spent my whole life believing she abandoned me, but the house had taken her. The way it almost took me. The only way to find the truth was to go deeper. That night, I stood before the mirror in the hall with the oldest one in the house and whispered the lullaby. Tearing in my dreams, the mirror fogged, and then I saw it, not my reflection, but a child, 7 years old, with my eyes and Eliza's mouth, standing in a field of black roses, whispering, "Remember what they buried." And behind her, shadowy figures watched from the trees. I screamed, backed away, and the mirror cracked down the center. I ran to the attic, hoping to find something, anything, and that's when I discovered the final key. Beneath the floorboards under the cradle, buried even deeper than before, was a small wooden box filled with hair, teeth, and a single ring. The inscription read, "To break the silence. The blood must speak." I didn't understand, not yet. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't about ghosts. This was about inheritance, a legacy no one asked for. And the only way to stop it was to face what my family had tried so hard to forget, even if it meant becoming the very thing they feared most. The storm hit just after midnight. Thunder cracked above the house like bones snapping in the dark, and rain poured in sheets against the windows as if the sky itself was trying to wash the truth away. Before I uncovered it, I sat on the attic floor, the small box in my lap, the hair, the teeth, the ring that pulsed with a cold I couldn't explain. I knew now that these weren't just relics, they were pieces of a ritual. One that Eliza had started, my mother had resisted, and I was now fated to complete. The ring had once belonged to Eliza's daughter, born in secrecy, hidden from the others, and sacrificed to protect a bloodline that was never meant to survive. But somehow, it did. The symbols carved into the attic beams, into the cradle, into the mirrors, they weren't just decoration. They were seals, containment, warnings to keep what lived within the Whitfield women buried. The power, the knowing, the curse. That night, I found the final journal entry, written not by Eliza, but by my mother. It was buried in the back panel of the trunk, hidden behind a false wall, as if even she was terrified of its presence. "If Nora finds this, I'm already gone." It read, "The house is awake again. The silence is failing. The bloodline is too loud to be ignored." I tried to protect her. I burned the names. I sealed the mirrors. I gave up everything to keep her from hearing them. But I failed, and now the house will call her like it called me. Like it called Eliza. She must choose, bury it, or become it. My hands trembled as I read those final words. My mother had tried to stop this. She'd vanished not because she was weak, but because she fought harder than any of us. And now it was my turn. As the storm raged, I took the ring and the journal, walked down to the chamber behind the basement wall, and stood in the center where the child's dress still lay, soaked and waiting. I whispered the name that had burned itself into my bones, Eliza. The mirrors around me flickered, and for the first time, I saw all of them. Not just Eliza, but every woman in the bloodline, my mother, her mother, women I'd never known, all staring back at me through time. And they were crying, not in sadness but in relief. I dropped to my knees and spoke aloud, not knowing what words would come. "I remember you now, all of you, and I'm not afraid." The house trembled. The walls bled light, and in that moment, I felt every memory, every loss. Every secret surged through me like a river breaking its dam. I wasn't just Nora. I was Eliza. I was every Whitfield woman who had suffered in silence. The final seal cracked. The lullaby stopped, and for the first time in 132 years, the house went still, not silent, still watching, listening, waiting for the choice only I could make. The room stood frozen round me, like the breath before a scream or the moment just before a lightning strike. All the women, my mother, Eliza, every Whitfield who had ever been silenced, stared back at me from the mirrors, waiting, not for vengeance, not for blood, but for a voice, for a final decision. My hands ached from clutching the ring in the journal, but my heart had never felt clearer. The house had been a prison, a sanctuary, and a tomb all at once. It didn't want to hurt us. It wanted to remember us. It had only ever mirrored the pain we left buried behind its walls, and we had left so much. I looked at Eliza's face, my own face, fractured across centuries, and I finally spoke the words I didn't even know I'd been carrying my whole life. You didn't fail. I'm still here. The lights above the pedestal dimmed. The mirrors began to hum like they were breathing, and the chamber cracked open along the floor, revealing a second level, a place darker, deeper, colder. I descended, barefoot, past dust and memory, until I reached a room with stone walls and a single wooden chair in the center. A name was carved into the back of it, Nora. My knees buckled. This was never just about Eliza. It was always going to end with me. I stepped into the chair and sat, gripping the ring, and began to speak, not aloud, but from somewhere deeper. I told the story of every woman in my bloodline. I spoke of their pain, their strength, the fire that took them, and the silence that bound them. I became their voice, and in doing so, I shattered the silence. The house shook violently, not in anger, but in release, like it had been holding its breath for over a century. The whispers faded. The air grew warm. The mirrors upstairs cracked, not in destruction, but as if their purpose had ended. And above it all, I heard my mother's voice for the first time in 25 years. I knew you'd come home. I collapsed in tears. Not fear, not pain, just freedom. When I awoke the next morning, the house was empty. The mirror in the hallway reflected only me. No echoes, no shadows. The journal had burned to ash beside my bed, and the cradle was gone. The curse had ended not with a ritual, not with blood, but with truth. I stayed one more night before locking the house for good. As I left the driveway, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence was gone. I was free. Thank you for listening to my story. What part of Nora's journey moved you the most? Was it the haunting silence, the hidden bloodline, or the strength it took to speak after generations of fear? If this story made you feel something, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves emotional thrillers, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories like this again. There are more voices to be heard, and more truths still waiting to be uncovered. This story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries.